Marion Chubb, who will be delivering a masterclass, which is called Paint, Print and Stitch.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining today. It's a beautiful day, and thank you for being here and learning about print, stitch and paint. I'm just going to quickly show you a little tour of my space today, because I'm at home and this is my usual place where I work, and I'm just going to quickly turn my camera around. It's an organised, chaotic space, so I love my books. I've got a window here, all my materials. So it's a lovely space with lots of natural light. Thanks again for joining me. Today we're going to be doing an expressive layered artwork using a number of techniques, and we're going to be making our own printing blocks from cardboard. So it's a very DIY, homemade aesthetic, using materials around the house. So we're going to be making our own printmaking ink using washing up liquid, and any paints that we can find hanging around the house, like tester pots, for example. You might have some of those knocking about. I've got some acrylic paint, and then I'll be mixing up ink with golden syrup. And the reason we'll be doing that is because acrylic paint is notorious for drying really fast, and what either the washing up liquid or the acrylic paint does is it slows down the drying times. And it also is a very economic way of making your own paint, because printmaking ink, for instance, this is the proper printmaking ink, links to everything afterwards. That costs £10 a tube. So this way, we're making up our own inks. This is £1.99 for a whole tin. So the next thing I want to do is share some inspiration with you. So Daniel, if you bring up my presentation, please. I'm going to talk through some artists' work I really like. So the first slide, that's one of mine. A while back, I was making silk screen prints onto silk, and I was also making them into scarves. So this is an open screen print technique, and I'll show you how I did that in this class. Next slide, please, Dan. And this is a print by an artist that I really love. He's called Bill Chambers. He's Newport based now, and he does so much printmaking in so many different ways. And these are his monotypes. And I'll show you a bit about how that effect might be achieved. And monotype is a very underrated printmaking technique, and it's very close to painting, and it's very expressive, as you can see. This is Halfwayton, and I love her work. She really takes things to a new level. So she uses image transfer, she uses printmaking, collage, and she also puts motion transfer on top to make really lovely layered expressive prints. And this is Richard McVettis, London-based artist, and his work is all about his relation to time and space. So the stitches that he uses are all the same stitch, and he often stitches onto three-dimensional surfaces. He uses wool, and he uses it as a very meditative process, and I find stitch work really relaxing as well. This is one of my artworks. I've put an expressive background, so I just wetted the fabric, loaded up with ink, and then I've traced an image from a newspaper. And there's so many images out there that you could use, but obviously for copyright reasons, be careful of doing that. Only use really your own sketches. I recommend sketching every day. That's what I like to do. And then when you've got a traced line, as you can see on the left, it allows you to focus on your stitch work. Without that traced line, you can become lost quite easily, and you can't focus on your stitch work. So on the right-hand side, there's the back of that piece, and I find the backs of things really interesting as well, maybe more so than the front. Okay, so here's some test prints that I've done, and this is some of the things that we're going to be doing today. So I've supplied you with a template, and I'll talk about that in a bit. And what we're going to be using are limited colour palettes, and we're going to be working from light to dark. So we'll put a light coloured background, and then we'll gradually work towards the foreground using dark colours. And then afterwards, we'll be embellishing that with stitch work. I don't expect anyone to be doing that today when you're printing, because the prints that you make are going to be very sticky, and you're going to have to leave them to dry before you can even begin to think about stitching onto them. So next slide, I'll show you the type of stitch work that we're going to be using. And it's a really simple straight stitch or a running stitch. It's also the same stitch that bookmakers use for bookbinding, so it's called saddle stitch. And in Bengali culture, it's called kantha, and they use it for quilt making. And in Japanese culture, it's called sashiko, and they use predominantly indigo fabric with white coloured thread. If you want to explore more of these processes, more of these artists, please look them up. And there's also links to places where you can buy some of the threads that I'll be talking about in a minute. And if you want to refer back to these slides at the end, you're very welcome, and you've got all the information there. So the next thing I'm going to do is talk about threads. My favourite thread, this is what I've used on this detail here. It's called Pearl 8. It's cotton, and it's just really, really good to work with. That's my favourite. It also comes, can you see that? It also comes in a dip dyed version, which is amazing. It's dip dyed, this is on silk, and it's a bit more expensive than that, but it's really a pleasure to work with, so I'd recommend getting hold of some of that. To prevent it from getting in a big knot like this, you can do what designer Paul Smith does, and he winds thread onto small bits of cardboard, and he does this to figure out his designs for textiles. So he designs ties and socks using this method. So you might also just have this cotton in the house, and that's perfectly fine to use. It does tend to get knotted up, so what you need to do for that is run it across a candle, or if you've got a tea light, just run the thread across it. So this is with the thin cotton thread, and that way it will stop it from getting into knots when you're sewing. I recommend using the thread double, and you know, putting a knot right at the end. So I'll show you how to do that in a minute. You might have this is called embroidery floss, and it's actually for cross stitch, and it's quite thick, so I'm not really keen on it, but what you can do is take a bit and you can split it. So I'll just do that quickly. There are 6 strands to this thread. I'm going to take a few apart, and then you gently pull it all the way across and all the way down, and use the thinner version of that thread, okay? Put that to there. So I'll quickly demonstrate the stitch and how to knot the thread. So when you're using your thread, take the amount that measures from the crease of your elbow, can you see that? The crease of my elbow to my wrist, and that's how long the thread's going to be that I'm going to be working with. It's the easiest length of thread to use without it getting into knots. I've pre-threaded my needle. If you have trouble threading the needle, hold it against a white or light coloured background, and that will really help you see the eye of the needle. I'm going to take a knot twice around my finger, and then with finger and thumb, excuse my dirty fingernails, I've been printmaking all day, I'll make the knot right at the end, okay? It's worth practicing. Before you start stitching on your prints, make yourself a sample. So this is just an old bit of fabric I found around the house. Put something to stabilise it on the back so that it doesn't flop around when you're working. And then start varying the stitches that you're making. So when you're working, think about the length of each stitch, think about the spaces in between each stitch, and we're just using one stitch because less is more, and when you've got constraints in your design work, you actually come up with better design solutions. You could also think about the negative space and then cluster the stitches around it, and also think about the direction that you want to take stitches. So I'll just quickly show you the stitch. Come through the back of the fabric, and it's a good idea to use either a pencil, or sometimes you can get pens that are washable, to create a line to follow. You see that? One stitch. So it's a forward movement through the fabric. Some designers, I know there's a brilliant artist called Emily Jo Gibbs, and she creates portraits using organza fabric, and she actually uses this same stitch, but she does an up and down motion instead of a forward running stitch. And that way, sorry, your stitches are very neat. It's a lot slower. It might not be a process for you, but if you're really, really particular about your stitch marks, then maybe practice that method. A really quick method is also to do this. Gather a lot of fabric, but I don't really like that because your stitches can become quite untidy, and you might pull the fabric, and you don't want that to happen either. Okay, so there's all I've got to say about stitches, and I've got to move on really quickly because I know I've got lots to show you. Right, let's start then with the expressive printmaking. And before I do that, I need to ink up my plate. This isn't an exact science, by the way. I'll just bring my materials in the centre, but normally printmakers are very tidy people and they're very organised. So they'd have, you'd have your inking up blocks on your left with all your ink to one side. You'd have a clean area for where you're going to be printing. You'll also have a dirty area for placing your printmaking blocks onto. And you'll also have to your right a lot of paper, a lot of spare paper ready for the printing process. So I'm just going to ink up with the golden syrup. Use a knife to get it off your spoon and keep it separate. You don't want to put this back in your cupboard and use it for baking or anything. Likewise, my inking up surfaces, I'm just using chopping blocks from the kitchen. Again, ask whoever owns those blocks before you use them. You could also use, this is a plastic ring binder divider, and you can tape that down and that becomes a really good inking up surface as well. So let's get this background on. So I really like these acrylic paints by Golden. They're very high in pigment, but that doesn't matter. You know, you could also use your DIY tester pot. Like I say, it's not an exact science. This isn't bad actually. The consistency of the printmaking ink is quite the same as if you would get it straight from the tube. I'll add a bit more. Ooh. Decided not to play ball with me today. Oh yeah, and don't wear your best clothes when you're doing printmaking, because it is quite messy. So that looks about right. I got this this roller from corner shop, and it was £1, and you don't have to have fancy materials. In an ideal world, you could have a proper printmaker's, I mean, this is quite a cheap one. So yeah, just find things around the house. But not a massive paint roller, that just wouldn't work. I'm just going to ink up this surface now. With a paper. So this is a sort of monotype effect really. Don't apply a lot of pressure. And then you've got a kind of an expressive background going on there. Blot it. You never know what's going to happen in printmaking. It's really nice to experiment. So you could get a piece of card and make some shapes. I mean, monotype, as the name suggests, you should only take one print off it, but that's not strictly true. You can take a number of prints. They just fade the more that you do it. So that's really nice with just the cardboard as a spreader. Put that to one side. Because it's sticky, I'd get the kitchen roll and blot it. Because we'll be coming back to that in a minute. Method number 2. You could use scraps of paper from around the house. So this is an old envelope, and I've put white acrylic paint on the background as a base. You don't have to do that, by the way, but it just gives you a nice surface to work on. You could also use an envelope that has a window and make use of that. It could be something, you know, in lockdown you could make a series of prints to do with a window. And then I'm going to get my paint. Scrape a bit off. Remember, we're going to be working from light to dark, so try and make a light mixture, and then get your card, hold it at a 45-degree angle, and then just sweep it across your page like that. Okay? Really simple. If you have your roller as well, you could do a mixture of rolled on paint and that cardboard effect. Again, take your paper, blot it, put it to one side. Let's talk now about making our own block from cardboard. I don't know about you, but I've been doing a lot of shopping online, and a lot of this cardboard is around the house. So get yourself the block and then start cutting abstract shapes. Keep it simple, cut a few things out. You could really spend time with this and make a design where you're following a drawing and taking time with it, but this is fine for now. I'm just going to get my glue stick, stick those things down, and then I'm going to ink that block up. Okay? So this process really lends itself to the traffic outside. This process really lends itself to making slogans, and very simple. What you've got to remember, if you do want to make a slogan, just to reverse your letters, because they will print the wrong way around. So this is some that I've done earlier. I just thought that the technique is very textural, and it lended itself to this. Okay, so let's ink this one up. So I'm going to go a little bit darker than that that green that I printed earlier. You could try the washing up liquid, you could give that a go. Buy a clear version of washing up liquid so it doesn't sort of interfere with your colours. And then as you get to learn more and more about printmaking, you'll start to learn more about the properties of paint. And some of them are opaque, some of them are transparent. And the more that you do this, the more you'll find out which ones work best, which ones look good together. But with this technique, you can't go wrong if you work from light to dark. So the expressive background will be your lightest colour, and then we'll gradually work towards our darker colours. Don't worry about this looking really runny because the roller will soak it all up. If you don't have a roller, you can apply the paint with a brush like this. A soft acrylic brush is best, not the firm bristle ones. Don't worry if sometimes you get sugar crystals forming, and that's perfectly normal. That will add to the texture of it, and you can also wipe those bits off if you really don't like them. Put a piece of paper down on your surface before you ink up to try and keep everything clean. You might find that your plate is really dirty when you've attached it to the cardboard block, but don't worry about that. You can wipe away those excess bits with cotton wool buds or with baby wipes. I'm just going to go for it. I'm just going to put this background down. Just apply an even pressure. So the first prints that you make are going to be really strong, and then the ones that you do afterwards will gradually be paler. So start to experiment with the density of the paint. See, that one's a lot more textured, as you can see. And also onto fabric, it's more absorbent, so your prints will be a lot paler on the fabric. Let's ink that one up again. Try that one again. Paper. Get down. You could also flip your cloth over and get a card or a credit card and then rub that surface, and that will give you a good print as well. Oh wow, that one's really strong. So yeah, have a play around. And then we'll talk about that template. I prepared the template for you because sometimes we don't know where to start with our work, and if you've got something already made, it's really helpful. And when I keep my sketchbook, I've got an obsession with Morocco at the moment. So I've got this sketchbook, it's only A5, and I do colour tests from photographs, and then I do sketches, and then to choose then what kind of print would really lend itself to this technique, I'm looking for, rather than this one, although I like this image, it doesn't really suit this process. I'm looking for prints that have bold shapes in them and that they're easy to cut out of cardboard, because you don't want to get too detailed with this because it gets a bit fiddly otherwise. Oh, and this one. That's a really simple jug with flowers and plants in it. You could really go to town and start cutting different blocks, different plant forms, and use this grey cardboard. It's brilliant. This flat grey stuff that you find from the back of an old exercise book, that's ideal. And then you can emboss your templates as well. So I hope you've prepared one. You get a pen. Where's my pen? Alright, my pen's just, oh here it is. Get a biro, just went for a walk, that pen. And then just start pressing patterns into the card. And what that will do, it will prevent the ink from settling in those areas, and they will print white, hopefully. So I'm not going to do that all the way around. I've done that one there. And let's print that up. So I'm going to go for my darkest colour now. So I'm just going to add black. It could be watercolour. Bit more of the blue. Get your pen, sorry, your knife, I'm using it now, to ink up. Don't forget your magic ingredient, which is your golden syrup. And again, experiment with the amount of syrup and the amount of paint. Okay, oh that's so messy. I'm just worried I'm going to run out of time. Okay, that looks pretty good.
You've got another 15 minutes, Marion, so
awesome.
we're really good.
I'll get that away. I'm going to choose a background that I did earlier. So that one's with the roller and a bit of cardboard. Let's get this one. Okay, so in preparation, I'm going to print up elephant. So you could cut out any shape you want. There's a lot of ink on there, so on fabric I think that one would come out quite well. I'll give that a go on the fabric. Move that out of the way. Can you see that? Elephant. Down here. Get another piece of paper or a bit of kitchen roll and then press quite firm pressure all over the print, and then I'm going to peel it off to one side, and there's my elephant print. So as I say, it's a very textural DIY sort of process. I'll take another print of that one to show you what it's like on the paper. And do give yourself time to let these prints dry before you do anything to them, because they are pretty sticky, especially with the golden syrup. Actually, Bill told me about that, golden syrup, the printmaker Bill. And let's have a look. Oh, that one's nice. Don't forget to
Marion, do you have to wait for the layer underneath, so the layer you've got now, the green layer, to be fully dry before you put the print on?
You don't have to, although as you can see, when I took that ink off, quite a lot of ink has lifted up. So you don't have to wait for it to dry. As long as you've blotted it and left it, for a few minutes, you can print straight on it. But it's
Okay.
entirely up to you. Play around with it. Maybe you might find, actually, I want that layer to be dry before I do any more. It just adds more time to the process and working.
Thank you.
Other things you can print with, just to sort of, carry on this DIY aesthetic. Don't forget the toilet rolls. They make really good marks. So on this piece, I've done marks in the background just with the toilet roll. You can squeeze the toilet roll as well, and that gives you different marks. You could cut it. What else? Yeah, as I was saying about when you learn about printmaking, you learn about colour and you learn about properties of paint. So you can figure out which are your best colours that lend themselves to transparency and depth in your work. You could also find coffee and tea. That's another one. It doesn't work well with golden syrup and washing up liquid though. To do that effect, you'd have to have a proper acrylic extender medium or a gel-based medium that you would mix with coffee and tea, but that's a really good effect. So if you're planning, just finally to wrap up, if you're planning to use a lot of these prints in your work, these little blocks, cleaning them just with water, and you could make that as a printmaking opportunity. Get a sketchbook, get your dirty plate, sponge, bit of water. I could probably do with a bit more ink there, but you get the idea. You could make a stencil with the print and you could draw on top. Later you could add collaged bits of colour. So never waste an opportunity to make art, is what I say. And finally then, what to do with all of these prints that you've made? Well, apart from stitching on them and painting on them, you could, and painting with a paintbrush to add detail, you could take a photograph of it or scan it into your computer if you've got that sort of software. Scan it in, digitally manipulate it. They can be turned into repeat patterns. They could be, if you've got a story to illustrate, they could make some really good illustrations for a book. So many things that you could do with your process, and it's really nice that it's handmade and it's just from stuff around the house. So
we just had another, it's more of a comment I think than a question, someone suggesting that you can use the corrugated part of the cardboard, so peel the cardboard layers to reveal the different textures.
That's brilliant. Yeah, that's a really good one, because you don't have to then make a printing block at all. I've gone and done a block and cut these pieces, but you don't have to do that if you've got this part. That's a really good surface to use. And I just really like layering the backgrounds with these different textures. And you can have a lot of fun with it, The grey cardboard I think is really good, because you could actually get your template and stick it on to cardboard so you can handle it better. And the corrugated cardboard, you can emboss it with holes and it gives a completely different feel. It's very rough and ready, as opposed to...
Marion, I just had another question, sorry, from Phil from Pembrokeshire College. He's asking, out of curiosity, does the golden syrup or the washing up liquid, which gives the closest effect to printer's ink?
Oh, that's a really good question. To be honest, I don't think there's a lot in it. What I found with the washing up liquid is when you're rolling up the ink, and if you have got a sponge roller, there'll be loads of bubbles. They don't necessarily print though, And it's a bit alarming when you're seeing all these bubbles and you're thinking, oh no, that's not going to work, but it's actually pretty good. The golden syrup, I think the texture of the golden syrup is the closest to printmaking ink.
There is another question. You might be able to see these yourself now, but it's a question from Stephanie. She said, stitching thread question.
Oh, great.
She said, you said pearl 8. Is it a specific thickness?
Ooh. Yeah. It's the only one that I really like using, apart from the Steph Francis one. This one's thicker, and I think that one's called number 8. This one is also called number 8. And then there's a number 5. So 8, 5 and 3 are the best ones. And this one, the Pearl 8, it's just I think it's just a standard sort of thickness. The link to the materials, I've looked at it and I've checked it, and that is the same one that I use. So
Right. And there's another comment rather than a question, which was from Amanda saying, thank you for a lovely and inspiring lesson. I'm looking forward to making and sharing with you in a few days.
Oh, that'd be amazing. Thank you. That's the best thing about this is seeing what people come up with. And, you know, it's lovely to share these processes. I don't keep things to myself because everyone is unique. Everyone has their own story. Everyone has their own voice. Everyone is creative if they allow themselves the time to be creative, and they set themselves up the creative conditions to let that happen. So it's entirely your spin on it. You know, what you do with it is fantastic. I can't do what somebody else does, and I think, you know, equally someone can't do what I'm doing, and that's what makes this really fun, and that's what makes this really lovely to share and keep ourselves occupied in lockdown. I mean, without being creative and sewing and being mindful and using sewing as a meditative process, I don't know how I would have coped, really. And your perception of time, it changes when you're in the moment and you're stitching. Time lengthens, so, and it calms you down. So everything prior to lockdown was just so fast, wasn't it? You know, you're running from here to there. Everything's so fast. Technology, you're on it all the time. And I know this is wonderful. We're sharing things via the internet, and that's amazing. But equally, you need that time to step back for yourself and to create and have the quiet time and just to play, right?
We're coming to the end now, so if anyone would please put any final questions into the chat box. There is a final question from Tara about where could we purchase the materials, and I know in your list of materials you've suggested places where people can purchase and links, so that's great. So it's not just a link of materials, there's also a list of where things can be purchased. And she's also asking, would you do any more workshops? I presume if she follows you on Instagram and on your social media, she can probably find out what you're up to in various places.
Yeah, absolutely. Look me up on Instagram and my web details and all that. You can see what I get involved in. I work a lot with the community and run workshops. So yeah, I'm sure I'll be doing a lot more of this sort of stuff. Thank you, you know, to the team at Arts Council for enabling this to happen. It's been a bit of a journey, hasn't it?
I can see we're in the final minutes. All that's left, I think, really, is to say a really huge thank you from myself on behalf of the Arts Council, and also I'm sure I say thanks on behalf of all those who've watched this masterclass as well. Finally, once again, I want to say thank you to you, Marion.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.